Imagine a frozen plain near the end of the Ice Age. The night is over. The sky is slowly brightening. Frost still clings to the grass. Somewhere, out in the distance, a herd begins to move across the landscape. A teenage Homo sapiens sits beside his older sister.
And he waits, he watches, he listens. Every morning before this one, she woke up. Every morning before this one, she stretched, took a breath, got to her feet, and stepped back into the rhythm of the tribe.
So he does what he's seen people do before. He places a hand beneath her nose. Nothing. He waits a little longer. Tries again. Nothing. Maybe she's asleep. Maybe she's exhausted. Maybe she just needs a little more time. A child's explanation. A child's hope. The sun climbs higher. Frost turns to water. A line of birds drifts across the morning sky. But she doesn't move. Not after a few minutes. Not after an hour. Not after the morning has passed. And slowly, something unfamiliar begins forming inside his mind. First confusion, then unease, then something deeper, something harder to describe, because every problem he has ever known eventually ended. Hunger ended. Storms ended. Darkness ended. This doesn't... Wait, what if she isn't coming back? What if this isn't sleep at all? What if this is something else entirely? Researchers estimate that humans have been confronting death for tens of thousands of years. But fossil records suggest there must have been a first moment when someone truly understood what death meant. Not pain, absence. Not leaving, gone. Maybe there was a day when a human being looked at someone they loved and realized a terrifying truth. Some journeys have no return. And once that realization entered the human mind, everything changed. 120 to 300. But how could we possibly know if that moment ever happened? How can archaeologists look back across tens of thousands of years and separate grief from instinct? Because the truth is, humans aren't the only creatures that react to death. Elephants have been seen lingering near the bones of relatives. Some primates stay beside a dead infant for days. Wolves do it. Dolphins do it. Even crows seem to respond to loss in ways that feel strangely familiar. So what makes us different? The clue may be hidden underground. Researchers have uncovered graves dating back tens of thousands of years. Not bodies left where they fell. Not remains scattered by scavengers. Something else. Intentional burials. A body carefully placed in a prepared space. A body positioned with purpose. A body surrounded by objects that offered no obvious survival benefit. And that's where the mystery starts getting interesting. Because death itself isn't unusual. Every living thing dies. The unusual part is how humans responded. Imagine investing precious time, energy, and effort into someone who can no longer hunt, gather food, defend the group, or contribute to survival. Why do that? Why dig a grave for someone who will never use it? Why leave gifts for someone who can never hold them? At first, those sound like simple questions. They're not, because hidden inside them is something profound. Fossil records suggest that by at least 40,000 years ago, and perhaps earlier, humans were already treating death as more than a biological event. Not an ending. A passage. Not a body. A person. Not survival. Meaning. The breakthrough wasn't the first human death. The breakthrough was the first human thought about death. The moment somebody stopped asking, "What happened to the body?" and started asking, Where did they go? Now imagine that boy again. Winter passes. Then spring. Then another season after that. His sister is gone. Gone from the camp. Gone from the hunt. Gone from the small moments that once filled every day. And yet something keeps happening. At night, she comes back. He sees her running. He hears her laugh. He hears her voice. Sometimes she looks healthy. Sometimes she looks happy. Sometimes she seems as alive as she ever was. Then morning arrives, and she's gone again. A contradiction. A memory that feels alive. Today, you call that a dream. But imagine experiencing it without neuroscience, without psychology, without any explanation at all. What conclusion would you reach? If someone appears before you night after night after night, are they truly gone? Or has part of them survived somehow? Researchers can't know exactly what ancient humans believed. No written records remain from that distant world. But current evidence points toward an intriguing possibility. Dreams may have transformed death from a physical mystery into a spiritual one. By day, the body was gone. By night, the person remained. Life and death, presence and absence, gone and somehow still here. The human brain struggles with contradictions. It looks for patterns. It looks for explanations. It looks for stories. And eventually, stories begin to form. Maybe the body stopped. Maybe something else continued. A simple idea, yet an incredibly powerful one. Powerful enough to change the course of history. Because once people began imagining that part of a person could survive death, death itself became harder to accept, and hope became harder to let go of. Sometimes the first religion isn't faith. Sometimes the first religion is grief. Around 70,000 years ago, in caves scattered across parts of Western Asia, another human species may have been wrestling with the same mystery: the Neanderthals. Imagine a small community gathered around someone who will never stand up again. The cave is quiet. The air is cold. A familiar face sits motionless. Researchers still debate exactly what happened at some Neanderthal burial sites. The evidence isn't complete, and important questions remain unanswered. But fossil records suggest something remarkable. Some bodies appear to have been deliberately placed into prepared pits instead of being left exposed to weather, scavengers, and time. And that detail matters, because digging a grave takes effort. Effort requires intention, and intention requires thought. Wait, why spend precious energy on the dead when simply staying alive is already difficult? Food wasn't guaranteed. Winters could be brutal. Every hour mattered. Yet someone stopped what they were doing to care for a body that could no longer contribute to the group. Not because it improved hunting success. Not because it offered an immediate reward. But because the dead had become something different. Someone worth acknowledging. Someone worth honoring. Maybe they believed in an afterlife. Maybe they didn't. Maybe they were searching for meaning without even realizing it. The evidence can't answer every question, but it reveals something important. Even our closest evolutionary relatives may have felt that death demanded more than indifference. Loss was becoming significant. Loss was becoming symbolic. Loss was becoming human. And maybe that's where it all began. By around 40,000 years ago, the picture becomes clearer. Early Homo sapiens began leaving behind graves unlike anything that came before. Beads, mineral pigments, personal ornaments, tools, objects placed beside the dead with deliberate care. Now ask yourself something. If none of these items could bring a person back to life, why place them there? That question leads somewhere extraordinary. Because these burials were no longer only about the dead, they were about the living, too. Imagine spending hours threading hundreds of tiny beads together. Imagine traveling to gather red ochre from distant places. Imagine placing treasured possessions into a grave and knowing you'll never see them again. None of that improved survival. Yet people did it. Again and again. Because memory had become valuable. Because identity had become valuable. Because relationships had become valuable. The body dies. The story stays. That might be one of humanity's oldest discoveries. Researchers estimate that some burial traditions required hours, sometimes even days, of collective effort. An expensive act, a demanding act, a deeply human act. And that changes everything, because evolution often rewards efficiency. Yet here, memory defeated efficiency. Here, attachment defeated practicality. Here, love outlived biology. If you're still with me, consider subscribing, because what comes next may explain why billions of people today still feel connected to people who are no longer here. Now imagine a fire burning beneath a dark sky somewhere between 20,000 and 15,000 years ago. People gather close. Someone begins to speak. Not about hunting, not about weather, not about danger. About a dream. A mother says she saw her son. A brother says he heard a familiar voice. An elder says the dead walk somewhere beyond sight. One story becomes two. Two become 10. 10 become tradition. And tradition becomes belief. That's how invisible worlds are born. Not through evidence, through repetition. Not through certainty, through shared experience. The dead survive where memory refuses to die. No one knows exactly what was said around those ancient fires, but humans are storytellers by nature. We connect dots. We create meaning. We turn private experiences into shared truths. And once enough people begin telling the same stories, those stories start shaping reality itself. What begins as grief becomes mythology. What begins as longing becomes cosmology. What begins as a dream becomes religion. Perhaps the earliest spiritual beliefs weren't created by kings seeking power, not by priests seeking control, not by rulers demanding obedience. Maybe they began somewhere much simpler. A brother missing his sister. A parent missing a child. A friend missing a friend. A memory that refused to fade. And from that refusal, entire worlds may have emerged. But this is where things get uncomfortable. Because there's another possibility. What if none of it was true? What if there were no spirits? No hidden realm? No part of us that survives after death? What if the entire thing began as a misunderstanding inside the human mind? At first, that sounds dismissive. But it isn't. In fact, it might be even more fascinating. Researchers who study human cognition have pointed out something peculiar about the way our brains work. We're constantly searching for patterns, constantly looking for intention, constantly trying to figure out who's behind what. You hear a sound in the bushes. Is it the wind? Or is it something watching you? For most of human history, making the wrong call could get you killed. So our brains evolved with a bias. Better to assume there's something there than miss a real threat. Better to detect an agent that doesn't exist than ignore one that does. And over thousands of generations, that habit became deeply wired into us. Wait, Could that same instinct explain why humans see presence in absence? Why we sense someone in an empty room? Why dreams can feel more convincing than waking reality? Could grief itself become evidence? Could memory become proof? Could longing become belief? Maybe. Current evidence can't tell us whether ancient spiritual beliefs were true. Archaeology can't tell us what happens after death. Science can't excavate an afterlife. And maybe that's not the question that matters most, because history changed either way. Whether the invisible world was real or imagined, people behaved as though it existed. And behavior changes history. Not certainty, action. Not proof, consequence. Not what people knew, what people believed. Think about the world around you. Money works because people believe it works. Nations exist because people believe they exist. Laws have power because people collectively agree they have power. Shared beliefs create shared realities. The most powerful forces in history are often invisible. And perhaps humanity's earliest ideas about death work the same way. A dream becomes a story becomes a tradition becomes a worldview. And before long, that worldview begins guiding entire civilizations. So maybe the important question isn't whether the afterlife exists. Maybe the important question is this: what happened once humans believed it did? The obvious answer is that religion emerged to explain death. But that's only part of the story. Death may have lit the match. What followed became the fire. Imagine a species that starts believing life has significance beyond immediate survival. A species that believes today's actions matter tomorrow. A species that believes meaning can survive the body. Suddenly, everything changes. Researchers estimate that across countless generations, human beings invested enormous effort into honoring ancestors, preserving memories, and maintaining sacred places. First came graves, then cemeteries, then monuments, then myths, then entire civilizations. One layer built upon another. One story built upon another. One generation building on the last. The chain stretches across thousands of years. Look at some of humanity's most astonishing achievements. Ancient temples, massive stone structures, ceremonial centers that required years of labor, places not built for food, not built for shelter, not built because someone needed immediate survival, built for ideas, built for memory, built for meaning. And meaning is a strange thing. You can't hold it in your hands. You can't weigh it. You can't place it under a microscope. Yet people cross continents for it. People dedicate entire lives to it. People sacrifice comfort, wealth, and safety for it. The future is built from things you cannot touch. At first glance, that sounds absurd. But culture itself is invisible. Stories are invisible. Values are invisible. Promises are invisible. Yet they shape nearly every decision we make. The ability to imagine something larger than your own lifetime may be one of the most important abilities our species ever developed. A hunter plants trees whose shade he will never enjoy. A parent sacrifices for descendants they may never see grow old. A community spends decades building monuments that won't be completed within a single lifetime. Why? Because the human mind can travel beyond the present moment, beyond the individual, beyond death itself. And perhaps that ability has deeper roots than we realize. Perhaps it began with grief, a lost sister, a lost friend, a lost parent. And from that loss emerged something unexpected. Not destruction, creation. Not hopelessness, culture. Not the collapse of meaning, the birth of meaning. The fear of losing those we love may have become one of the forces that built civilization itself. Now bring all of this back to your own life. When was the last time you dreamed about someone who had died? Not remembered them. Dreamed about them. Maybe they spoke to you. Maybe they laughed. Maybe for a few brief moments, it felt as though nothing had changed. Then you woke up, and there it was. That strange feeling, that unsettling feeling, that deeply human feeling. For a second, they felt real again. For a second, they felt close. For a second, your brain struggled to separate memory from presence. And if you've experienced that, you're not experiencing something modern. You're experiencing something ancient. Researchers estimate that the same basic brain architecture responsible for memory, dreaming, attachment, and social bonds has existed for tens of thousands of years. Which means the gap between you and that Ice Age teenager may be smaller than it appears. You carry a smartphone. He carried a stone tool. You live among roads, buildings, and electric lights. He lived beneath open skies. Different world, same mind, the same capacity to love, the same fear of loss, the same instinct to hold on to people who matter. And maybe that's the most remarkable part of this story. Across continents,
Across cultures,
across thousands of generations,
humans kept returning to the same question.
what happens after someone is gone?
No one has the final answer.
But the search itself helped shape who we became, and that search is still alive inside you. And so we end where we began, with a teenage boy sitting beside his sister on a cold morning near the end of the Ice Age. The sun continues to rise. The frost slowly disappears. Birds move across the sky on their own journey. The world keeps moving, but he doesn't. Not yet, because something has happened inside his mind, something that may matter more than anything happening around him. For the first time, he has encountered a question no animal can easily escape. A question no civilization has fully answered. A question that still follows us today. Where did she go? Maybe he never said those words out loud. Maybe he didn't yet have the language. Maybe he didn't yet have the concepts. There was no philosophy, no theology, no science. Not in the form we know them today, but the question was already there. Small, silent, immense. Researchers estimate that countless generations would spend the next millennia wrestling with that same mystery. Some searched through myths, some searched through gods, some searched through reason. Different roads, same destination. Not the search for survival, the search for meaning. Wait, what if that was the real turning point? What if the most important moment in human history wasn't the first tool, wasn't the first fire, wasn't the first successful hunt, but the first time someone realized that a person they loved was never coming back? The dead changed the living. That possibility echoes through every grave, every prayer, every monument, every story our species has ever created. Because once death became more than an event, life became more than an event too. Life and death, loss and meaning, endings and beginnings. Two sides of the same mystery. Imagine that boy looking at his sister one last time. He couldn't know that tens of thousands of years later, billions of people would still be asking versions of the same question. He couldn't know that entire civilizations would grow around it. He couldn't know that you would be asking it too. Yet perhaps that was the moment everything began to change. The moment humans accepted death may have been the moment humans began searching for meaning. Perhaps humanity began not when we learned how to survive, but when we learned how to grieve. Subscribe.